The house was quiet, the way only a house that was once filled with noise can be. Not a peaceful quiet, but a hollow one, where the memory of laughter and footsteps echoed in the stillness. I sat in my armchair, the one Robert always claimed was his, its fabric worn smooth over decades of life. The only light came from the small lamp on the end table, casting a soft yellow circle on the floor and leaving the corners of the room in deep shadow. In my hands, I held a stack of papers stapled together at the corner. They felt impossibly heavy, heavier than any book I had ever held in my years as a librarian. My fingers trembled not from the chill in the air, but from the coldness of the words printed in neat black ink. It was a contract, a business proposal. The letterhead at the top read, "The Reed Family Care Agreement." Below it, a series of clauses and subclauses laid out the terms of my life. I scanned the lines my eyes had already read a dozen times, hoping they would somehow change. Section 3, Schedule of Duties. See attached Appendix A for detailed rotation of daily responsibilities. Monday, Wednesday, M. Reed. Tuesday, Thursday, S. Jenkins. Friday, Sunday. See Financial Compensation Clause 5. Clause 4.2, Expense Reimbursement. All approved out-of-pocket expenses, including mileage at the standard IRS rate groceries and prescription copays, must be submitted with receipts by the 5th of the following month for reimbursement. Addendum B, Non-Standard Task Point System. Additional tasks, e.g., unscheduled doctor's visits, home maintenance, emotional support exceeding 30 minutes, may be assigned points redeemable for schedule-free weekends or financial bonus. Emotional support exceeding 30 minutes. The phrase felt like a slap. I looked up at the mantelpiece at the framed photograph of us. Michael, Sarah, and David, all smiles and youthful confidence, standing beside Robert and me on our 40th anniversary. We looked so happy, so unbreakable, a family. I traced the edge of the frame in my mind, a familiar gesture of comfort that now offered none. My love for them, the boundless, unconditional thing I thought was the bedrock of my world, had been itemized. It had been assigned a point value. I leaned my head back against the chair, the rustle of the papers in my lap, a mocking sound in the silence. I whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts of the past. It was all just a business deal. 3 days earlier, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, smelling of freshly cut grass and the promise of a warm autumn day. The light was the color of melted butter pooling on the oak table, where I sat trying to open a jar of marmalade with one hand. My left wrist, encased in a gray fiberglass cast, was useless. It was a constant, frustrating reminder of my foolishness. A simple misstep on the back porch stairs, a moment of lost balance, and my world had tilted on its axis. The doctors called it a clean break. I called it a declaration of dependence. For 5 years since Robert passed, I had prided myself on my self-sufficiency. This house, our home for nearly 50 years, was my kingdom. I knew its every creak and groan. I could fix a running toilet patch a hole in the drywall and keep the roses in the garden blooming long into October. Robert had been the sturdy foundation, but I had been the one to keep the walls standing strong after he was gone. The fall had taken that from me. It had revealed the cracks in my own foundation. My good hand strained against the lid of the jar. My knuckles were white with effort. With a grunt of frustration, I gave up slumping back in my chair. The simple act of making toast and tea had become a monumental task. I looked around the kitchen at the photos stuck to the refrigerator with fruit-shaped magnets. Michael's son graduating from college. Sarah's 2 girls at their soccer game. A faded picture of David, my youngest, on a beach somewhere in California, squinting in the sun. They were good children. They had been so worried after my fall. They called, constantly sent flowers, promised to help. And they had. That afternoon, they were all coming over for what Michael had called a family meeting. Michael, my eldest, was a financial planner. He liked order spreadsheets and clear, actionable plans. Sarah, my daughter, a high school teacher, was the worrier. She operated on emotion and guilt, her heart always a little too heavy for her own good. And David, my free-spirited graphic designer, would be joining via video call from his apartment 2 time zones away. He was the contributor, the one who sent money and heartfelt if infrequent text messages. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. Michael was never late. I opened the door to see him and Sarah standing on the porch, their faces etched with a familiar loving concern that both comforted and chafed me. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, leaning in to give me a careful hug, mindful of my cast. She carried a grocery bag that smelled of fresh bread. Come in," I said, stepping back. "Don't stand out there." Michael followed her in, giving my shoulder a firm squeeze. "How are you feeling? Did you remember to take your pain medication?" "I'm fine, Michael. It's a broken wrist, not a terminal illness," I said a little more sharply than I intended. I hated being fussed over. We settled in the living room. Sarah placed a laptop on the coffee table, and after a moment of clicks and beeps, David's face appeared on the screen. He was in his studio, a messy, creative-looking space behind him. "Hey, Mom, you're looking good," he said, his voice tinny through the small speakers. "It's a screen, David. Everyone looks good from 2,000 miles away," I replied, but I smiled. Seeing their faces together, even one of them through a screen, was a balm to my soul. Michael cleared his throat, taking on the role of chairman he always assumed in these situations. "Okay, so we're all here because we love you, Mom, and we're worried about you." Sarah nodded eagerly. "We just don't think it's safe for you to be here all alone right now, especially while you're healing." I felt a familiar prickle of defensiveness. "This is my home. I'm not leaving it." No, of course not," Michael said quickly, holding up a hand. "That's not what we're suggesting. We've been talking, and we've come up with a better solution. A way to make sure you're taken care of, that you have everything you need, and that we can all share the responsibility." He spoke with such calm, logical authority. It was the same tone he used when he explained retirement portfolios to his clients. He made it sound so simple, so reasonable. "What kind of solution?" I asked my guard, softening a little. "A system," he said. "A schedule. We've worked it out so that one of us will always be here, or at least checking in every single day. Sarah and I will take turns staying over a couple of nights a week, helping with meals, driving you to appointments, that sort of thing. And I'll handle the financial side," David piped in from the laptop. "I'll cover any extra costs, groceries, a cleaning service, whatever you need, just so you don't have to worry about a thing." Sarah reached over and took my good hand. Her palm was warm and a little clammy. "We just want to make this easy for you, Mom. We don't want you to worry about being a burden. This way it's all organized. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. A burden." The word hung in the air. I had never once thought of myself as a burden, but the fact that they had created a whole system to manage it sent a small, cold shiver down my spine, but I pushed it away. They were trying to help. They were my children, and they loved me. What parent wouldn't be grateful for such dedicated care? I looked from Michael's earnest face to Sarah's worried eyes to David's smiling image on the screen. The weight of the last few weeks, the struggle with the marmalade jar, the long, lonely nights suddenly felt heavier. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to let go of a little of my stubborn pride. "It sounds very organized," I said slowly. "It is," Michael said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "It's efficient. This way no one gets burnt out and you get consistent care. We'll start tomorrow. I'll take the first shift." A shift, like a factory worker or a security guard. The language was strange, a little sterile, but the intention behind it felt pure. They were my family, rallying around me in a time of need. It was what families did. "Okay," I said, managing a real smile this time. "Thank you. All of you. It means the world to me." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. The tension eased. Sarah went to the kitchen to make tea. Michael started telling me about his son's latest triumphs in his first year of law school. David stayed on the screen listening, a slightly distant but present member of the family circle. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before the fall. The house didn't feel so hollow. It felt protected. I thought of Robert and how proud he would be of our children. They were good kids, responsible, caring. They had a plan. I fell asleep feeling safe, wrapped in the comforting blanket of my children's love never once suspecting that the blanket was woven with clauses, conditions, and a cold, calculated system of points. I was not a mother being cared for. I was a liability being managed, and the project was just beginning. The house was quiet the way only a house that was once filled with noise can be. Not a peaceful quiet, but a hollow one, where the memory of laughter and footsteps echoed in the stillness. I sat in my armchair, the one Robert always claimed was his, its fabric worn smooth over decades of life. The only light came from the small lamp on the end table, casting a soft yellow circle on the floor and leaving the corners of the room in deep shadow. In my hands, I held a stack of papers stapled together at the corner. They felt impossibly heavy, heavier than any book I had ever held in my years as a librarian. My fingers trembled not from the chill in the air, but from the coldness of the words printed in neat black ink. It was a contract, a business proposal. The letterhead at the top read, "The Reed Family Care Agreement." Below it, a series of clauses and subclauses laid out the terms of my life. I scanned the lines my eyes had already read a dozen times, hoping they would somehow change. Section 3, Schedule of Duties. See attached Appendix A for a detailed rotation of daily responsibilities: Monday, Wednesday, M. Reed; Tuesday, Thursday, S. Jenkins; Friday, Sunday. See Financial Compensation Clause 5, Clause 4.2, Expense Reimbursement. All approved out-of-pocket expenses, including mileage at the standard IRS rate groceries, and prescription copays must be submitted with receipts by the 5th of the following month for reimbursement. Addendum B, Non-Standard Task Point System. Additional tasks, e.g., unscheduled doctor's visits, home maintenance, emotional support exceeding 30 minutes, may be assigned points redeemable for schedule-free weekends or financial bonus. Emotional support exceeding 30 minutes. The phrase felt like a slap. I looked up at the mantelpiece at the framed photograph of us. Michael, Sarah, and David, all smiles and youthful confidence, standing beside Robert and me on our 40th anniversary. We looked so happy, so unbreakable. A family. I traced the edge of the frame in my mind, a familiar gesture of comfort that now offered none. My love for them, the boundless, unconditional thing I thought was the bedrock of my world, had been itemized. It had been assigned a point value. I leaned my head back against the chair, the rustle of the papers in my lap, a mocking sound in the silence. I whispered to the empty room, to the ghosts of the past. It was all just a business deal. 3 days earlier, the morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, smelling of freshly cut grass and the promise of a warm autumn day. The light was the color of melted butter pooling on the oak table, where I sat trying to open a jar of marmalade with one hand. My left wrist, encased in a gray fiberglass cast, was useless. It was a constant, frustrating reminder of my foolishness. A simple misstep on the back porch stairs, a moment of lost balance, and my world had tilted on its axis. The doctors called it a clean break. I called it a declaration of dependence. For 5 years since Robert passed, I had prided myself on my self-sufficiency. This house, our home for nearly 50 years, was my kingdom. I knew its every creak and groan. I could fix a running toilet patch, a hole in the drywall, and keep the roses in the garden blooming long into October. Robert had been the sturdy foundation, but I had been the one to keep the walls standing strong after he was gone. The fall had taken that from me. It had revealed the cracks in my own foundation. My good hand strained against the lid of the jar. My knuckles were white with effort. With a grunt of frustration, I gave up, slumping back in my chair. The simple act of making toast and tea had become a monumental task. I looked around the kitchen at the photos stuck to the refrigerator with fruit-shaped magnets. Michael's son graduating from college. Sarah's 2 girls at their soccer game. A faded picture of David, my youngest, on a beach somewhere in California, squinting in the sun. They were good children. They had been so worried after my fall. They called, constantly sent flowers, promised to help. And they had. That afternoon, they were all coming over for what Michael had called a family meeting. Michael, my eldest, was a financial planner. He liked order spreadsheets and clear, actionable plans. Sarah, my daughter, a high school teacher, was the worrier. She operated on emotion and guilt, her heart always a little too heavy for her own good. And David, my free-spirited graphic designer, would be joining via video call from his apartment 2 time zones away. He was the contributor, the one who sent money and heartfelt if infrequent text messages. The doorbell rang precisely at 2 o'clock. Michael was never late. I opened the door to see him and Sarah standing on the porch, their faces etched with a familiar loving concern that both comforted and chafed me. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, leaning in to give me a careful hug, mindful of my cast. She carried a grocery bag that smelled of fresh bread. Come in," I said, stepping back. "Don't stand out there." Michael followed her in, giving my shoulder a firm squeeze. "How are you feeling? Did you remember to take your pain medication?" "I'm fine, Michael. It's a broken wrist, not a terminal illness," I said a little more sharply than I intended. I hated being fussed over. We settled in the living room. Sarah placed a laptop on the coffee table, and after a moment of clicks and beeps, David's face appeared on the screen. He was in his studio, a messy, creative-looking space behind him. "Hey, Mom, you're looking good," he said, his voice tinny through the small speakers. "It's a screen, David. Everyone looks good from 2,000 miles away," I replied, but I smiled. Seeing their faces together, even one of them through a screen, was a balm to my soul. Michael cleared his throat, taking on the role of chairman he always assumed in these situations. "Okay, so we're all here because we love you, Mom, and we're worried about you." Sarah nodded eagerly. "We just don't think it's safe for you to be here all alone right now, especially while you're healing." I felt a familiar prickle of defensiveness. "This is my home. I'm not leaving it." No, of course not," Michael said quickly, holding up a hand. "That's not what we're suggesting. We've been talking, and we've come up with a better solution. A way to make sure you're taken care of, that you have everything you need, and that we can all share the responsibility." He spoke with such calm, logical authority. It was the same tone he used when he explained retirement portfolios to his clients. He made it sound so simple, so reasonable. "What kind of solution?" I asked my guard, softening a little. "A system," he said. "A schedule. We've worked it out so that one of us will always be here, or at least checking in every single day. Sarah and I will take turns staying over a couple of nights a week, helping with meals, driving you to appointments, that sort of thing. And I'll handle the financial side," David piped in from the laptop. "I'll cover any extra costs, groceries, a cleaning service, whatever you need, just so you don't have to worry about a thing." Sarah reached over and took my good hand. Her palm was warm and a little clammy. "We just want to make this easy for you, Mom. We don't want you to worry about being a burden. This way it's all organized. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. A burden." The word hung in the air. I had never once thought of myself as a burden, but the fact that they had created a whole system to manage it sent a small, cold shiver down my spine, but I pushed it away. They were trying to help. They were my children, and they loved me. What parent wouldn't be grateful for such dedicated care? I looked from Michael's earnest face to Sarah's worried eyes, to David's smiling image on the screen. The weight of the last few weeks, the struggle with the marmalade jar, the long, lonely nights, suddenly felt heavier. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to let go of a little of my stubborn pride. "Okay," I said, managing a real smile this time. "Thank you, all of you. It means the world to me." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. The tension eased. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt since before the fall. The house didn't feel so hollow. It felt protected. I thought of Robert and how proud he would be of our children. They were good kids, responsible, caring. They had a plan. I fell asleep feeling safe, wrapped in the comforting blanket of my children's love, never once suspecting that the blanket was woven with clauses, conditions, and a cold, calculated system of points. The system began the next day. Michael, true to his word, arrived at 9 in the morning for his first shift. He came in not with a hug, but with a clipboard. "Morning, Mom," he said, placing his briefcase on the floor and setting the clipboard on the kitchen counter. "I've drafted a master grocery list. I'd like you to go over it, see if there's anything you want to add. I've focused on nutrient-dense foods for bone health. I looked at the list. It was alphabetized. It looks very thorough, Michael. Efficiency is key, he said, tapping a pen against the board. Now I've also synced our calendars. Your physical therapy appointment on Wednesday is in. Sarah will be taking you. I'll be here to let the plumber in to look at that leaky faucet in the guest bath. He was a whirlwind of managed care. He checked the expiration dates on everything in my refrigerator, throwing out a half-eaten yogurt and a bottle of salad dressing he deemed too old. He reorganized my pill organizer, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was all helpful. It was all terribly efficient. And it was all completely devoid of warmth. He didn't ask how I slept. He didn't ask if I wanted to sit and talk. He was executing a series of tasks. I was the project. When Sarah's turn came on Tuesday, the atmosphere changed, but the underlying feeling did not. Where Michael was clinical, Sarah was flustered. She arrived late, apologizing profusely, her hair still damp from a rushed shower. Sorry, Mom, traffic was a nightmare. And then Chloe couldn't find her cleats for practice. You know how it is. She bustled around the kitchen trying to cook a lasagna while simultaneously texting her husband and fielding a call from her other daughter, Emily. I sat at the kitchen table watching her. Her movements were jerky, her attention split in a dozen different directions. Sarah, honey, why don't you sit down for a minute? Have a cup of tea, I offered. I can't, Mom. I've got to get this in the oven. She set her back to me, and I promised Michael I'd go through your mail and sort out the bills. Later, I heard her on the phone in the hallway, her voice a hushed, stressed whisper. No, I can't tonight. I'm at Mom's. I know, but it's my day. Michael would have a fit if I switched without giving 48 hours notice. 48 hours notice. The phrase snagged in my mind. It was the language of an employer, not a brother. David's contribution arrived silently via an email. The subject line was Q4 Reed Care Fund. Inside was a brief message. Hi, Mom, sent the first transfer. Let me know if you need anything. Love, D. Below was a screenshot of a bank transaction. It felt less like a gift and more like an invoice had been paid. Days bled into one another, marked by the changing of the guard. Michael's brisk efficiency on Mondays and Wednesdays. Sarah's harried, apologetic presence on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Weekends were a rotating schedule that seemed to cause the most friction negotiated over text chains I wasn't privy to. The house was no longer my own. It was a managed property. My children's visits, which I had once treasured for their spontaneity, were now scheduled appointments. They would arrive, complete their designated tasks, ask if I needed anything else, and leave. The easy, lingering conversations over coffee, the shared memories sparked by an old song on the radio, the simple comfort of just being together, all of it was gone, replaced by a checklist of duties. I found myself growing quiet, retreating into myself. I tried to tell myself I was being ungrateful. They were busy. They had their own lives, their own pressures. This was the only way they could manage. But a cold knot of disappointment was tightening in my chest. They weren't caring for me. They were managing a problem. The breaking point came on a Wednesday during Michael's next rotation. He had decided to use the spare bedroom Robert's old den as a temporary office when he was here. He'd brought in a second monitor and a sleek ergonomic chair. The room, which still smelled faintly of Robert's pipe tobacco and old books, now smelled of sanitized electronics. He was out on a grocery run, a trip he'd pre-planned to maximize efficiency, of course. I was sitting in the living room, feeling a wave of nostalgia so powerful it ached. I wanted to feel a connection to the family we used to be, not the corporation we had become. I wanted to see their smiling faces before they were clouded with responsibility and schedules. I wanted to see the old photo albums. I knew exactly where they were, in the big built-in bookcase in the den. I pushed myself up from my chair and walked slowly down the hall. The door to the den was ajar. Michael's laptop was closed on the desk, his briefcase beside it. The room felt foreign, orderly, sterile. I ran my good hand along the spines of the books on the shelf, looking for the familiar worn leather of the albums. There they were on the bottom shelf. But as I reached for them, my eye caught something else. On the desk next to his briefcase was a neat manila folder. The label printed from his computer was simple and stark: E. Reed, Care Agreement. My breath caught in my throat. Agreement. It was such a formal, sterile word. Why would our family arrangement need an agreement? My heart began to beat a little faster. It was an invasion of his privacy, I knew, but it was my name on the tab. A sudden cold dread washed over me, a feeling that I was about to find something I didn't want to know. My hand shook as I reached for the folder. I lifted the cover. The first page was titled in bold, centered text, "The Reed Family Care Agreement." I sank into Michael's cold, ergonomic chair, the folder in my lap. I started to read. The paper was smooth and cool, corporate feeling. It was the kind of paper Michael used for financial reports, thick and important. I read the title again. The Reed Family Care Agreement, letting the words sink into me like stones into water. An agreement. Not a promise, not a plan, but a formal contract. My eyes scanned the first section, Statement of Purpose. It was full of sterile, legal-sounding language. To ensure the continued health, safety, and well-being of Evelyn Reed, to distribute caregiving responsibilities equitably among all participating parties, to create a sustainable framework for long-term support. It sounded like they were managing a corporate merger, not their own mother. Then came the schedule, the one Michael had mentioned. Appendix A. It was a color-coded grid. Michael's days were in blue, Sarah's in green. The weekends were a complicated patchwork of yellow and orange blocks, with names assigned to 4-hour increments. There were notes in the margins. S. Jenkins to coordinate all medical appointments. M. Reed responsible for all financial and home maintenance oversight. It was the battle plan for an occupation, and I was the territory to be conquered. I turned the page. Clause 4. Financial arrangements. This was where the cold dread began to turn into a sharp physical pain in my chest. I read about David's quarterly contribution to a joint account and how Michael and Sarah could be reimbursed for approved expenses. I saw the line item for mileage. They were tracking the miles they drove to come see me. Every trip to my house, to the grocery store, to the pharmacy was being logged and calculated. The bag of fresh bread Sarah had brought me, was that a gift or an expense to be submitted? My mind flashed back to a snowy afternoon 30 years ago. Michael, then a teenager, had crashed his first car into a snowbank. It wasn't serious, but he was terrified to tell his father. I had driven him to the garage, paid for the tow and the minor repair out of my own small savings, the money I kept in a tin box for a new dress. I never told Robert. It was our secret. A simple, unrecorded act of love. I never asked to be reimbursed. I forced myself to read on. The words blurred, and I had to blink to bring them back into focus. And then I saw it. The part that stopped my breath. Addendum B, non-standard task point system. It was a list. Emergency room visit, 15 points. Last-minute schedule change, less than 48 hours notice, 5 points penalty. Home maintenance, e.g., plumbing, electrical, 5-10 points based on time. Emotional support, call off schedule exceeding 30 minutes, 3 points. 3 points. My grief, my fear, my loneliness, it was worth 3 points. Only if it lasted longer than half an hour. Was there a stopwatch involved? Did they time my tears? Did they hang up at the 29-minute mark to avoid having to log the interaction? The room felt like it was shrinking. The air grew thick and heavy. I thought of Sarah years ago, crying on the phone with me for hours after her college boyfriend broke up with her. I thought of Michael sitting in this very room, talking late into the night about his doubts and fears before he proposed to his wife. I thought of all the times they had needed me, and how my time, my support, my love, had been as boundless as the sky. I never measured it. I never assigned it a value. It was the very essence of being their mother. And they had taken that essence, that sacred, unspoken bond, and turned it into a transaction. A rewards program. Points may be redeemed for schedule-free weekends or a financial bonus from the Q4 Care Fund. They could earn a weekend off from me. They could cash in their points for money. David's money. The whole structure was suddenly hideously clear. Michael organized it. Sarah did the emotional labor. David paid for it all. They had divided me up piece by piece. My body, my home, my heart. The final page was the signature page. Michael's signature was firm and decisive, the ink dark and confident. Sarah's was underneath it, smaller, a little shaky, as if she had hesitated before signing her name. And David's was a scanned digital signature, clean and detached, sent from miles away. They had all agreed. This cold, cruel document was the one thing they had all agreed on. My love for them didn't die in that moment. It was worse than that. It was hollowed out. The vibrant, living thing that had defined my life was suddenly a beautiful, empty shell. The form was there, but the substance was gone. I heard the sound of Michael's car in the driveway. Panic seized me. I folded the document with numb fingers, my movements stiff and clumsy. I slid the folder back to the exact spot on the desk where I had found it. I pushed myself out of the cold, ergonomic chair and walked back to the living room, sinking into my own familiar armchair, just as the front door opened. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm back," Michael called out, his voice cheerful. He came into the living room with 2 grocery bags. They had organic kale on sale, and I got you that low-sodium chicken broth you like. He set the bags down. He was performing his duties. This was a task on his list. He was earning his keep. "Thank you, Michael," I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, distant and thin. "No problem at all," he said, looking at his watch. "Right on schedule. I'm going to unpack these, and then I'll get started on fixing that wobbly leg on the dining table. Should be about a 5-point job, I think." He must have been thinking aloud, not realizing he'd said it. The words, so casual, so normal to him, landed like punches. A 5-point job. He smiled at me, a quick, efficient smile. "You just rest, Mom. I've got everything under control." I watched him walk into the kitchen. I felt nothing. Not anger, not yet. Just a profound and bottomless emptiness. The warmth of the armchair couldn't reach the cold that had settled deep in my bones. I looked out the window. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was wrestling with her garden hose, trying to untangle a knot. She was a widow like me, but fiercely, almost comically independent. Her children lived far away and rarely visited. I used to feel sorry for her. Now I felt a pang of envy. Her loneliness was honest. It wasn't disguised as scheduled point-based affection. The document in the other room was a ghost now. I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unknow it. It would haunt every interaction from this moment on. Every question about my health, every meal cooked, every errand run, it would all be filtered through the cold lens of the contract. Was this a genuine act of kindness, or were they just trying to accumulate points for a weekend off? The love I had for my children had always been a simple truth, a fundamental law of my universe like gravity. Now I had discovered gravity was a lie, and I was floating untethered in the silent, cold expanse of my own home. My hand, the one without a cast, instinctively went to my chest, as if I could physically hold my own breaking heart together. The family I thought I had was gone. In its place was a team of managers, and I was their most difficult, least profitable asset. The agreement wasn't about my care. It was about its cost. And I finally understood with a clarity that was both devastating and absolute that I was paying for it with everything I had. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, mostly my own. I didn't confront them. I didn't have the words, and even if I did, I didn't know what I would be asking for. You can't demand genuine affection. You can't negotiate for love. To do so would be to participate in the very system that was suffocating me. So I said nothing. I became an observer in my own life, a ghost in my own home. My performance was flawless. I smiled when they arrived for their shifts. I thanked them for the meals they cooked and the errands they ran. I answered their questions about my pain levels and my physical therapy progress with practiced patience. But on the inside, I was a detective constantly gathering evidence. Every action, every word was cross-referenced with the contract I now knew by heart. Michael's visit on Monday became a study in Clause 4. To expense reimbursement. I watched him meticulously photograph a receipt for my prescription copay with his phone. "Just for our records," he said briskly, not meeting my eye. I pictured him uploading it to a shared folder, a neat little digital entry in the ledger of my decline. When he fixed the dripping shower head, he timed himself. 35 minutes, he announced to no one in particular, wiping his hands. Not bad. I mentally awarded him 6 points. He was good at his job. Sarah's turn on Tuesday was a lesson in Addendum B emotional support. She came in looking exhausted, the weight of her own family pulling at the corners of her eyes. She sat with me in the living room, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, and asked how I was feeling. Not my wrist, she clarified, but me, my spirits. It was a textbook emotional support check-in. I kept my answers brief and vague. Oh, I'm getting by, dear. The days are long, you know. I was careful not to let the conversation exceed 30 minutes. I didn't want her to have to log the points. The thought was so absurd, so perverse, it was almost funny. My children, who once knew my every mood, now saw only the surface. They interpreted my new quietness as a symptom of my age, a natural consequence of the fall. They discussed it in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear during the changing of the guard. She seems more withdrawn, Sarah would whisper to Michael in the hallway. It's to be expected, Michael would reply, his voice full of clinical certainty. Post-incident depression is common in her demographic. We just need to stick to the system. Consistency is the best thing for her. Stick to the system. It was their mantra, their shield. It protected them from the messy, unpredictable reality of a parent's aging. It turned love into labor, and it turned me into a job. The house, once my sanctuary, began to feel like a cage, albeit a comfortable one. My world had shrunk to these 4 walls, and these walls were now governed by a set of rules I was never meant to see. I felt a growing, desperate need for an ally, for someone outside the system who still saw me as Evelyn Reed, not E. Reed, the subject of a care agreement. My opportunity came on a bright, crisp afternoon. I was sitting by the front window, watching the autumn leaves skitter across the lawn, when I saw Mrs. Gable from next door. She was trying to drag her large green trash bin down her long driveway, her small bird-like frame struggling against its weight. It was Michael's day, but he was on a conference call in the den, his voice a low, serious murmur. On impulse, I got up. My wrists still ached, but I could manage. I walked out the front door, the cool air a welcome shock. Clara, I called out. Mrs. Gable stopped, shielding her eyes against the sun. Evelyn, what are you doing out and about? I thought you were under house arrest. Her voice was raspy, but full of life. The warden is on the phone, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in days. Let me give you a hand with that. Don't be ridiculous, your arm is in a sling, she protested, but she looked relieved. I have another one, I said, taking hold of the handle with my good hand. Together, we wrestled the bin to the curb. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. So she said, her eyes sharp and assessing. How's the royal treatment? I see your children coming and going like clockwork. You've got them trained well. The words meant as a compliment felt like a tiny puncture in my carefully constructed facade. They're very organized, I said, choosing my words carefully. Michael was always like that, she said, nodding, even as a boy. Used to line up his toy soldiers with a ruler. And Sarah, bless her heart, always trying to please everyone and ending up pleasing no one, least of all herself. She knew them. She'd watched them grow up from over the fence. She saw them not as parties to a contract, but as the people they were. It must be nice having them around so much, she said a little wistfully. My kids call on my birthday and Christmas. If the check clears, I know they're still alive. She laughed, a dry rustling sound, but her eyes held a familiar loneliness. Sometimes it's a lot, I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Sometimes the house feels crowded. Her gaze sharpened. She saw something in my face, some flicker of the truth I was trying so hard to hide. Crowded with people or with expectations I didn't answer. I just looked at her, and in her shrewd, knowing eyes, I felt a spark of understanding. She didn't know the details, but she understood the dynamic. She understood the complex, painful algebra of family obligation. Well, she said, patting my good arm, if the inmates ever take over the asylum, And you need a place to hide? My door is always open. I've got cheap sherry and a lot of opinions. We both smiled. The front door of my house opened, and Michael stood there, a cordless phone pressed to his ear. His face was a mask of disapproval. "Mom, what are you doing outside? You're not supposed to be lifting things." His voice was tight with annoyance. His perfectly managed system had been breached. "I was just helping Clara with her trash," I said. "Mrs. Gable, it's good to see you," he said, his tone shifting to one of strained politeness. "Mom, let's get you back inside. It's almost time for your medication." He was herding me gently but firmly back into my pen. I felt a flash of rebellion. "I'll be in a minute, Michael. I'm having a conversation." He looked taken aback. I hadn't contradicted him since the system began. A brief flicker of something anger frustration crossed his face before it was replaced by his usual calm control. "Fine, 5 more minutes." He retreated back inside. Mrs. Gable watched him go, one eyebrow raised. "The warden is not pleased." "No," I said, a new strange resolve hardening inside me. "He is not." That small act of defiance, that brief conversation on the sidewalk, felt like a deep breath after being underwater. It reminded me that there was a world outside the contract, a world where my actions weren't monitored and logged. It reminded me that I was still Evelyn, not just the project. Later that evening, after Michael had completed his tasks and left for the day, I sat alone in the quiet house. The emptiness felt different tonight. It wasn't just a void, it was a space to think. The contract was designed to manage my physical needs, but it had completely ignored my spirit. And my spirit, I was discovering, was not as broken as my wrist. It was bruised and battered, but it was starting to fight back. I thought about Robert. He would have hated this. He would have seen right through the spreadsheets and schedules. He would have looked at Michael and said, "Son, are you taking care of your mother? Or are you just checking boxes?" He would have told Sarah to slow down and just be present. He would have called David and told him to get on a plane, that money was the cheapest currency in a family. But Robert wasn't here. I was. And I couldn't rely on his memory to fight my battles for me. My children believed they had created a perfect logical system to handle a problem. They had failed to account for one critical variable: me. I was not a line item. I was not a task to be completed. And I would not let my life or my relationship with them be reduced to a series of bullet points in a 3-ring binder. The quiet rebellion had begun with a trash bin. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew I couldn't go back to being a compliant, silent observer. The ghost in the house was about to start making some noise. The noise I made wasn't loud. It was quiet, strategic, and aimed at the very heart of their system, its efficiency. If I was a project to be managed, I decided I would be a very poorly managed one. I started with the small things. On Sarah's next day, I forgot where I'd put my list of prescription refills. We spent a frantic hour searching for it, making her late to pick up her own daughters from school. She was a flurry of stressed apologies, both to me and to her family over the phone. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have asked for it the second I got here," she said, her voice frayed. "Oh, don't you worry, dear," I said, patting her hand with a serene smile. "My mind is just like a sieve these days." I knew exactly where the list was, in the pocket of the bathrobe I had worn the day before. This wasn't about malice. It was about disruption. I wanted to see what would happen when the gears of their well-oiled machine started to grind. With Michael, I targeted his obsession with order. He had reorganized my pantry into a masterpiece of food group categorization. Canned goods were alphabetized. Pasta and grains were in clear labeled containers. The morning after he'd perfected it, I went in and moved things around. I put the canned tomatoes with the cereal. I hid the coffee behind the flour. When he came in to make my lunch, he stopped dead in the pantry doorway. I saw his shoulders tighten. "Mom, did you go looking for something in here?" "I was just looking for the crackers," I said innocently from my armchair. He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes when he is counting to 10. "Okay, well, let's try to keep things where they belong, all right. It saves time." He spent the next 20 minutes restoring it to its previous perfect state. He was restoring the system, He didn't say another word about it, but a small, tight line appeared between his eyebrows and stayed there for the rest of the day. My acts of quiet sabotage were small, almost petty. I would ask for a specific type of tea that I knew was only sold at a store across town. I would suddenly remember an appointment I had forgotten to mention, forcing a frantic rescheduling of their carefully planned days. Each disruption was a small test. I was looking for a crack in the armor, a sign that they were more than just managers. I was looking for a flash of genuine unscripted frustration, or better yet, a moment of real connection that wasn't on a checklist. But all I got was more system. Michael created a new spreadsheet for unscheduled maternal requests. Sarah started calling me an hour before her shift began to confirm the day's agenda. They weren't adapting as a family. They were optimizing as a team. My rebellion was being absorbed, quantified, and turned into new clauses and protocols. The turning point, the moment my quiet rebellion had to become something more, came on a Tuesday. It was Sarah's day. She was in the kitchen on the phone. I was in the living room pretending to read, but I was listening to every word. Her voice was low and tense. She was talking to a friend, someone named Carol. "I'm just so tired, Carol," she was saying, the sound of her voice a raw whisper of exhaustion. "It's like I have 2 full-time jobs, and one of them doesn't pay." A bitter little laugh followed. "Actually, that's not true. Michael tracks every minute. He'll reimburse me for gas, but he questions the brand of almond milk I buy for her." My hands gripped the arms of my chair. "No, I can't meet for coffee. It's my mom day. And if I want to switch with Michael, I have to give him 48 hours notice, and a reason he deems valid. I know it's crazy. It's his way or the highway." There was a pause. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of Carol's voice on the other end. Then Sarah spoke the words that broke me. "Honestly, it's just easier to treat it like a job. Clock in, do the tasks, clock out. If I start thinking about it too much, if I let myself really feel it all, I'll fall apart. The contract it's stupid, but it's what holds it all together. It's what keeps me from screaming at him, or her, me." The air left my lungs. The book in my lap slid to the floor with a soft thud. Sarah didn't notice. She was still wrapped up in her own misery, a misery I now understood was partially my fault. I was the source of the job. I was the reason for the contract that was tearing her apart. Her exhaustion, her resentment, it was all there in that one whispered confession. And the most painful part was that she wasn't wrong. They had turned it into a job because the reality of caring for me was too much to bear. The contract wasn't just cruel. It was a desperate coping mechanism. I had been so focused on my own pain, my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't truly seen theirs. I saw Michael's controlling nature, not his terror of inadequacy. I saw Sarah's flustered inefficiency, not her profound exhaustion. I saw David's checks as a cold transaction, not a clumsy, guilt-ridden attempt to contribute from a distance. The contract wasn't just about managing me. It was about managing their own fears, their own guilt, their own strained relationships with each other. It was a terrible, flawed, dehumanizing solution to a very human problem. When Sarah got off the phone, she came into the living room, forcing a bright, tired smile. "Sorry about that. Now what can I get for you, Mom?" Feeling like some lunch, I really looked at her for the first time since I'd found the papers. I saw the dark circles under her eyes. I saw the tension in her jaw. I saw my daughter drowning under the weight of a life she couldn't control. And I was an anchor tied to her feet. "I'm fine, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet. "Why don't you sit down? You look like the one who needs to be taken care of." The question surprised her. It wasn't on the script. She hesitated, then sank onto the sofa opposite me. "I'm okay, Mom. Just a lot going on. I know," I said. And for the first time, I think she heard that I actually did. The weight of what I had to do settled on me. My small acts of sabotage were childish. They were only adding to her stress, reinforcing Michael's need for control. This wasn't a game I could win by moving the coffee or hiding a list. This required a move so bold, so far outside the lines of their agreement, that it would force them to scrap the entire rule book. I could not be a project to be managed, but I could also no longer be a passive victim. If their solution was a contract, then my solution had to be one too. A counteroffer. An exit strategy. That afternoon after Sarah left, I went back into Robert's old den. The room no longer felt alien. It felt like a command center. I sat down at the desk and pulled out a piece of fresh, clean paper. I found the phone number for an old friend of Robert's, a man named Arthur Vance. He was a retired estate lawyer, but before that, he had been our financial advisor for 30 years. He had helped us buy this house. He had set up the college funds for the children. He knew our family's financial history better than anyone. I picked up the phone, my good hand steady. When his secretary answered, my voice was clear and firm. "Hello," I said. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I need to make an appointment with Mr. Vance. It's about planning the next phase of my life." My war of attrition was over. It was time for a revolution. And it would begin not with tears or accusations, but with the one thing my children, especially Michael, would be forced to understand: a sound financial plan. They had shown me their terms. Now I would show them mine. Arthur Vance was exactly as I remembered him, a man who looked like he'd been born, wearing a rumpled tweed jacket. His office was filled with the comforting scent of old paper and leather, a stark contrast to the sanitized smell of Michael's temporary workspace in my den. Arthur was semi-retired, taking only a few clients he genuinely liked. Thankfully, he and Robert had been good friends, and he still held a soft spot for our family. He listened patiently as I explained my situation. I didn't show him the contract that felt like a sacred betrayal, a family secret too ugly to share with an outsider. Instead, I spoke in general terms. I told him my children had created a very structured system for my care, and that while I appreciated their intent, I was beginning to explore other options for my future. Options that would grant me more autonomy. Autonomy, Arthur repeated, peering at me over his spectacles. That's a word people use when they're feeling cornered, Evelyn. What's really going on? I took a deep breath. They love me, Arthur. I know they do. But their love has become administrative. I've become a task on a to-do list, a problem to be managed, and I've decided I don't want to be managed anymore. He nodded slowly, his expression unkind but shrewd. He didn't push for details. All right, so what do you have in mind? What does autonomy look like to you? It looks like independence, I said, the idea taking firm shape as I spoke it aloud. I've been looking into some of those newer independent living communities. Not a nursing home, I added quickly. A place where I have my own apartment, my own life, but with support available if I need it. A community. They're expensive, he warned gently. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. I need to understand my own resources. Robert and I, we were always careful. I need to know what's mine, what's available without anyone else's name on it. For the next hour, he pulled up my files. We went over my pension, Robert's life insurance policy, our investments, the value of the house. As he laid it all out, a quiet strength filled me. For years, Robert had handled the finances, and after he passed, Michael had gently tried to take over. I had led him believing it was too complicated for me. But looking at the numbers with Arthur, it wasn't complicated at all. It was a story of a life of hard work and careful saving. It was my story, and it was my asset. Arthur also gave me the name of a highly recommended facility about 30 minutes away. It's called The Willows, he said. Top-notch. More like a resort than a retirement community. They have a waiting list, but a good word from me might speed things up. I left his office with a thick folder of financial statements and a brochure for the Willows. The brochure was glossy, filled with pictures of smiling active seniors taking painting classes, playing bridge, and dining in a sunlit restaurant. It looked peaceful. It looked free. It was my escape plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a covert operative. During my children's shifts, I maintained my performance of quiet compliance. But when I was alone, I was on the phone with the Willows arranging a tour. I was on the internet researching the costs, the services, the application process. I was preparing my case. The strain of my double life was immense. Every polite thank you I offered Sarah for a bland, low-sodium meal felt like a lie. Every time I let Michael explain my own finances to me as if I were a child, I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying, I know. I've seen the statements. I was watching a play in which I was the main character, but only I knew I was about to walk off the stage. The day came when I decided to set the final act in motion. It was a Sunday. According to the schedule, weekends were a shared responsibility, usually resulting in a tense, brief visit from both Michael and Sarah, while David was expected to make his weekly support call. I sent a simple text message to all three of them. I need to have another family meeting. This afternoon at 4 p.m. Please make sure you are all here. It's important. The replies came quickly. Michael, is everything okay? This is outside the scheduled communications. Sarah, of course, Mom. Is there something wrong? David via text. Can't it wait for my call later? I have plans. I replied to them all with the same message, 4 p.m. in person. David, I need you on video. Don't be late. My tone, so uncharacteristically firm, so absolute, left no room for argument. It was the voice of a CEO, not a frail old woman. For the first time, I was the one setting the agenda. At 10 minutes to 4, the house was silent. I went into the den and retrieved the family contract from Michael's desk. My hands didn't shake this time. I walked to the dining room table, the table where we had shared thousands of meals, celebrated birthdays, and argued over politics. I placed the contract in the center. Next to it, I placed the thick folder of my financial portfolio from Arthur Vance. On top of that, I laid the glossy brochure for The Willows. My entire case laid out in 3 exhibits. I sat down at the head of the table in the chair that had always been Robert's. It felt right. I was calm. The nervous energy of the past few weeks had solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply done. The doorbell rang at precisely 4 p.m. I heard Sarah and Michael come in, their voices hushed and worried. They walked into the dining room and stopped. Their eyes went from my face to the damning display on the table and then back to my face. The color drained from Sarah's cheeks. Michael's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he recognized the folder. He knew. I pointed to the laptop I had already set up. Sarah, please get your brother on the line. Numbly, she did as she was told. A moment later, David's face appeared, looking casual and slightly annoyed. Okay, I'm here. What's the big emergency? Then he saw the expressions on his siblings' faces, and his own careless demeanor vanished. He saw me sitting at the head of the table framed by the documents. There was a long, heavy silence. They all stood there like defendants before a judge. I let the silence stretch, letting them absorb the scene. I let them see the contract, their secret shame lying exposed in the open. Finally, I folded my hands on the table and looked each of them in the eye, including David on the screen. My voice, when I spoke, was not the voice of a victim. It was steady, clear, and devoid of the quavering emotion they had grown so used to. Please sit down, I said. We have a lot to discuss. Michael was the first to move, pulling out a chair with a stiff, angry motion. Sarah sank into hers, as if her legs could no longer support her. On the screen, David leaned forward, his eyes wide. First, I began sliding the contract toward them with one finger. I believe this is yours. The air crackled with unspoken words. The accusations, the hurt, the weeks of my silent observation, and their oblivious management had all led to this single unbearable moment. The system had failed. The project was in open revolt, and their carefully constructed world of schedules and points was about to come crashing down around them. The meeting had begun. The silence in the dining room was thick enough to be a physical presence. It was made of shock guilt and the dawning horrified understanding on my children's faces. Sarah stared at the contract as if it were a venomous snake, her hand hovering near her mouth. Michael's face was a stony mask, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. On the laptop screen, David looked pale, his casual California demeanor completely gone. Where did you find that? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. In the den, on Michael's desk, I replied calmly, my gaze fixed on my eldest son. It was in a folder labeled with my name. I was looking for a photo album. Michael flinched, a small, almost imperceptible reaction. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. He straightened his shoulders, shifting from a guilty son to a defensive executive. Mom, you don't understand. It wasn't meant to be. It was just a tool. A way to organize things so we could give you the best possible care without burning ourselves out. A tool, I repeated the words, tasting like ash. Is that what you call it? I tapped the page with the point system. Emotional support, 3 points. A trip to the emergency room, 15. Tell me, Michael, as a financial planner, is that a good return on investment? That's not what it was about, he shot back, his voice rising. It was about fairness. Sarah has her family. I have my work. David is halfway across the country. This was the only logical way to make sure the burden was distributed evenly. The burden, I said quietly. The word landed in the center of the table and lay there ugly and exposed. I see. So that's what I am now. A burden to be managed and distributed. Sarah finally broke. A sob escaped her lips, and she buried her face in her hands. No, Mom, that's not it. I never wanted you to feel that way. Her words were muffled by her palms. It's so much. The kids and work and my own house, and then worrying about you. Michael said this would make it easier. He said it would stop us from fighting about it. So you signed it, I stated, not as a question. She nodded, her shoulders shaking. I was tired, and I felt so guilty. It felt awful, but it felt easier than arguing. I'm so sorry, Mom. My gaze shifted to the laptop screen. And you, David, was it easier for you too to just sign a check and have your responsibility fulfilled? David had the grace to look ashamed. He ran a hand through his hair. Mom, yes, it was. I'm sorry. I felt helpless being so far away. Sending money, making sure everything was covered, it felt like the most useful thing I could do. I trusted Michael to handle the logistics. I never thought... His voice trailed off. He didn't know what he had never thought because he had never thought about it at all. He had outsourced his conscience. They had all confessed. They had all explained their perfectly logical, perfectly selfish reasons. They thought that was what this meeting was about. They thought it was about my hurt feelings. They were wrong. I pushed the contract aside. I slid the thick financial portfolio toward the center of the table. This, I said, my voice cutting through Sarah's quiet sobs, is not about your guilt. It's about my life. I opened the folder to the summary page Arthur Vance had prepared for me, showing my total assets in a neat, undeniable figure at the bottom. For the past month, you have treated me like a dependent, a costly and convenient one. You've been operating under the assumption that I am helpless. You are mistaken. Michael leaned forward, his eyes scanning the numbers upside down. A flicker of disbelief crossed his face. Where did this come from? These figures, they're not comprehensive. They are perfectly comprehensive, I said coolly. They are the figures your father and I accumulated over 50 years of hard work. They are the figures you were never fully aware of because you assumed control of my accounts without ever doing a full audit. You saw a pension and a checking account. You didn't see the whole picture. I let that sink in. I had just dismantled his authority on the one subject he believed he owned money. And this I continued, placing the glossy brochure for the Willows on top of the portfolio as my solution. Not yours. Mine. Sarah looked up, her face tear-streaked and confused. The Willows? What is that? A hotel. It's an independent living community, I explained, my voice even. I have an appointment for a final tour and to sign the preliminary paperwork on Friday. I'll have my own 2-bedroom apartment, a full kitchen, a balcony overlooking the gardens. There's a pool, a library, and a dining hall. And there are medical staff on call, 24/7, should I ever need them. The reality of my words began to dawn on them. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a plan. A fully formed, financially sound exit plan. You're moving, Michael said, his voice flat with shock. You're selling the house. This house is the biggest asset I have, I said. It is far too much for me to manage, as you have all so clearly demonstrated. Selling it will fund my life at the Willows for the next 20 years and then some. It is the most logical thing to do. I threw his favorite word back at him. But this is our home, Sarah choked out. We grew up here. All our memories are here. Yes, I said softly, and for the first time, a tremor of my own deep pain entered my voice. My memories, too. I thought I would live here until the day I died. I thought my grandchildren would come here for holidays. I thought it would be a place of warmth and family. But over the past month, you have turned it into a workplace, a facility. You've taken the soul out of it. There is nothing left for me here but the ghosts of a family I thought I had. I looked at them, my 3 children. They were no longer managers or executives. They were just people flawed and stunned, facing the consequences of their actions. They had tried to solve the problem of me, and in doing so, had driven me away. So this is it, Michael said, his voice a low rumble. This is your solution. You're just leaving, cutting us off because we made a mistake. A mistake? I asked, my voice rising with a strength that surprised even me. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk, Michael. A mistake is saying the wrong thing at a party. This, I gestured to the contract, is not a mistake. This is a philosophy. This is a document that says your mother's love is quantifiable, that her time is a commodity, that her needs are a series of tasks to be checked off a list. You didn't just make a mistake. You fundamentally misunderstood what a family is, and I will not live inside your misunderstanding. I stood up, my legs a little shaky, but my resolve firm. The decision is made. I wanted to tell you in person as a courtesy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm tired. You can see yourselves out. I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving them there with the evidence of their failure spread out on the table between them. I didn't look back. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and sank onto the edge of my bed. My heart was pounding, and my body was trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. I had done it. I had taken back control. But as the adrenaline faded, a deep, aching sadness washed over me. It wasn't a victory. There are no victories in a battle like this. I had won my independence, but I had exposed the terrible cracks in the foundation of my family. I sat there alone in my room, listening to the muffled sounds of my children's voices from the dining room, no longer organized and efficient, but chaotic, angry, and lost. I had torn up their contract, but I had no idea if what we had left was worth anything at all. The house was quiet again an hour later, but it was a different kind of quiet. The hollow echo was gone, replaced by a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that follows a loud explosion. I hadn't moved from my spot on the edge of the bed. I had just sat listening to the argument in the other room escalate and then die down, followed by the sound of the front door closing. They were gone. I didn't know what I expected, an immediate apology. A desperate plea for me to stay. I had received none of that. I had only left them to fight amongst themselves, to point fingers and assign blame in the wreckage I had created. The thought brought me no satisfaction, only a profound weariness. The next few days were lonely. They respected my wishes. They didn't come over. Michael didn't call to check on my medication schedule. Sarah didn't text to confirm the day's agenda. David didn't send a perfunctory "How are you" message. The system was broken, and in its absence there was nothing. Their silence was a confession. They didn't know how to connect with me without their rule book. The contract, as much as I hated it, had been their only bridge to me, and I had burned it. I spent my time with Arthur Vance and a real estate agent. I moved through the motions of my escape plan with a numb efficiency that would have made Michael proud. The agent, a kind woman named Susan, walked through the house and talked about staging about curb appeal about the great bones of the property. With every suggestion to depersonalize the space by packing away my photos and trinkets, I felt a piece of myself being erased. I was dismantling my own life room by room. My tour of the Willows was on Friday. I drove myself my cast, now a minor inconvenience rather than a major disability. The place was just as beautiful as the brochure. The people were friendly. The apartment they showed me was bright and clean with a lovely view of a well-tended courtyard. It was perfect. It was sterile. It had no memories. Standing on the pristine balcony, I tried to imagine myself living there, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. The first crack in their silence came that evening. It was a knock on the door, soft and hesitant. I opened it to find Sarah standing on the porch alone. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was holding a small, misshapen loaf of bread. "It's zucchini bread," she said, her voice thick. "My first one of the season. I remembered it was your favorite." She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't make excuses. She just stood there offering me a piece of our shared past, a memory that had no point value. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room the way we used to, with no agenda and no schedule. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, staring at her hands. "About the contract. About everything. I was so caught up in being overwhelmed, I let Michael convince me that efficiency was the same as love. I let my exhaustion become an excuse for being a bad daughter." "You're not a bad daughter, Sarah," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "You're just a tired one. But that's not an excuse," she insisted, looking up at me, her eyes pleading for me to understand. "A mother's love is supposed to be the one thing in the world that isn't conditional, and we put conditions on it. We put it on a spreadsheet. When I think about what I would do if Chloe or Emily ever did that to me..." She trailed off, a fresh wave of tears welling in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Mom. Not just for hurting you, but for letting myself forget what really matters." Her apology was real. It was messy and heartfelt and had nothing to do with the system. It was the first real conversation we'd had in months. We didn't solve anything. The house was still going up for sale. I was still planning to move. But as she left that night, the heavy silence in the house felt a little lighter. 2 days later, it was Michael. He didn't knock. He used his key, but he called out from the entryway. "Mom, it's me. Can I come in?" It was a question of permission, not a declaration of his presence. It was a profound change. I found him in the den, standing by the desk where I had found the contract. He was holding an old photograph of him and Robert taken on a fishing trip years ago. "I've been a fool," he said without turning around. "All my life I've managed things. I manage people's money. I manage my team at work. I manage my kids' schedules. It's how I show I care, by making sure everything is safe and secure and running on time." He turned to face me, and his eyes were full of a raw emotion I had rarely seen in him. "When Dad died, I felt so helpless. I couldn't manage his illness. I couldn't fix it. And when you fell, that same feeling came back. This terror that I was going to lose you, and I wouldn't be able to control it. The contract." He shook his head, looking down at the floor. "The contract wasn't for you, Mom. It was for me. It was a stupid, arrogant way for me to feel like I had some control over the inevitable. I turned my fear into a spreadsheet, and in the process, I hurt the one person I was so desperate to protect." He finally looked at me. "I love you, Mom, not in a 3-point off-schedule phone call kind of way. I love you, and I am so sorry that I was too proud and too scared to show it properly." David's apology came last, and it came in person. He showed up at my door the next Saturday, a travel bag slung over his shoulder. He'd taken a red-eye flight. "I needed to say this. Looking you in the eye," he said, his voice raspy with fatigue. He told me how easy it had been to hide behind his money, to feel like he was doing his part without having to do the hard work of actually being present. "I wasn't just paying for groceries, Mom. I was paying to not feel guilty. It was a coward's way out. The contract was torn up. Not literally, I think Michael burned it in his fireplace, but figuratively. The house was taken off the market. My application to the Willows was withdrawn. We didn't go back to the way things were. We couldn't. We had to build something new. It wasn't a perfect magical fix. The new system was clumsy. It involved more honest phone calls and fewer scheduled visits. It involved Sarah admitting when she was too tired, and Michael admitting when he didn't have the answer. It involved David flying in for a weekend once a month, not to fulfill a duty, but to sit in the living room and just talk. It was messy and inefficient. It was real. The story ends, or perhaps begins again on Thanksgiving. The house is filled with the smell of roasting turkey and my zucchini bread, the one Sarah and I baked together the day before. Michael is in the living room trying to explain something to his son, and he's not looking at his watch. David is in the kitchen with me, awkwardly trying to mash potatoes, getting more on the counter than in the bowl. We're laughing. I look around the room at my family. My flawed, imperfect, loving family. The cracks in our foundation are still there. They will always be there, like scars. But they are no longer threatening to bring the whole structure down. They are just a part of our story now, a reminder of a hard lesson learned. My children had tried to quantify the unquantifiable. They had tried to put a price on love, and in doing so had almost lost it completely. But they had found their way back. Not through logic or efficiency, but through humility and honesty. I take my seat at the head of the table in Robert's chair, which now feels like my own. I look at the faces of my children, and I no longer see the authors of a cold corporate agreement. I see Michael's fear, Sarah's exhaustion, and David's distance. But underneath it all, I see their love. It was never gone. It was just buried beneath the pressures and practicalities of modern life. They just needed to be reminded of what a family contract is truly about: an unspoken, unwritten agreement of the heart. And it has no clauses, no addendums, and no expiration date.